You've committed adultery, and finally it's been found out. And it's been found out by your husband or by your wife. Now what are you going to do? Now how are you going to handle the situation? Because you can look at your partner and you can see their anger, or you can see their grief, or you can see their silence, or all of a sudden there is a wall that seems insurmountable, a wall that seems to reach to heaven. And you're sorry for what you did. You're grieved about it. You've gone to God. You've confessed it. You've made yourself right with God. Now the question is, what do you do with your mate? What do you need to know? How do you need to handle the situation? Today, we're going to find out what God would have you to do. Does the name Robert Crane ring a bell with you? Do you remember who he was? He was an actor. You say, Robert Crane, Hogan's Heroes. That's right. Do you remember Hogan's Heroes? Do you remember the days of good, clean family entertainment on television? You know, they still aired those programs because they were so popular. And as you looked at Hogan's Heroes, you saw a man that found his popularity through that program. He became so well known. Robert Crane was a real family man. He had children, he loved his wife, he loved doing things with them. But you know what? That program made him so very popular. And then something happened. His heart started to be turned away, and he found himself in an affair. And when that affair happened, his children said that they were so ashamed of their father. That affair was not handled properly. And because of that, he went down, Robert Crane went down and down and down until he ended up just having a terrible problem with alcoholism. The man started so well, but that affair changed the direction of his life. Maybe you've had an affair. And maybe you're wondering, is that it for me? Am I going to go down and down and down and down? Is my family going to be ashamed of me? Am I going to leave a wife that is brokenhearted and living with all sorts of doubts and recriminations in her life, or all sorts of bitterness and anger? Precious one, that does not have to be. If you will understand what you do after adultery, what do you do after you have committed adultery and your mate, your husband, or your wife finds out about it? How are you going to handle it? Well, this is so important. Now, remember, we saw the first thing that you do when you come to your senses and you realize that you have committed adultery, that you have sinned against God, you go to God. First, you run to God. And then if your mate knows about it, that's the one that you have offended so greatly. And you need to recognize these things, and you need to put these down. Write them down. They are so very, very important. You don't downplay the gravity of what you have done. Never downplay the gravity. Never blame the other person, because you are the one that chose to do it. It doesn't matter what they did. It doesn't matter what they failed to do. It doesn't matter how they behaved toward you. Each one of us is accountable for our own sin. You can say, but my wife or husband didn't sleep with me, but they didn't talk with me, but they didn't share with me. And true, in not being what they ought to have been, they made you vulnerable, but they did not make you sin. Sin is a matter of choice. It's a matter of choice. And sin begins in the mind before it ever gets to the actions. And so if you know how to control it in your mind, then it won't get to your actions. But so there's a process there. And the minute that you start to think adultery, the minute you start to think an affair, you need to stop it right then and there by bringing every thought, as it says in 2 Corinthians, captive to the obedience of Jesus Christ. So, you sinned. It was your fault. Number one, don't ever downplay the gravity of your sin. Don't ever dismiss your partner's pain, your partner's shame. Why? Because you have, number one, you've broken a trust. You see, you married that person and you said you were going to be my wife. You were going to be my husband. And it says, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, forsaking all others. You choose to spend your life with another person. And so you have broken a trust. Number two, you have shattered intimacy. And you have shattered intimacy because the one thing that makes our relationship with our husband or wife absolutely unique from every other relationship is what happens in the bed. It's what happens in the bedroom. It's what happens in that act of two coming together physically and becoming one flesh. And now what you have done is you've been one flesh here. You have come together with your wife. You have been one flesh with her, or you've been one flesh with your husband. Now you have gone and been intimate with another person. You have given yourself in the most intimate way you can give yourself to another person. So you have broken trust. Number two, you have shattered intimacy. And number three, you have violated a covenant. You have violated a covenant. A covenant, as we have talked about, is a solemn binding agreement. It's a solemn binding agreement, and Malachi chapter 2 says that marriage is a covenant. Whether you recognize it or not, God says it's a covenant. And God is a sovereign administrator over every covenant. And so when he sees a covenant made between two people, between two parties, and that covenant is violated, that covenant is broken, then God becomes the judge, the arbitrator in the brokenness of that covenant. All right, so you have broken trust, you have shattered intimacy, and you have violated a covenant. And number four, you have sown seeds of doubt in your mate. You have sown seeds of doubt, number one, regarding you. Can they ever trust you again? Will you do it again? Why did you do it? So you have sown seeds of doubt not only regarding you, the violator, but also you have sown seeds of doubt regarding the violated. What did I do wrong? What if I had been more? Why didn't I, whatever? I'm worthless. I'm no good. I don't measure up. And so you've caused that person, in a sense, to go and to look into a mirror and stand there in their mind, stark naked, with nothing to hide, and look at themselves and see all their spots and all their blemishes and all their faults, because they think if they had been perfect that you wouldn't have done this. You say, I am glad. I want them to see their faults. Listen, if that's your attitude right now, you watch out, because healing is not going to come. You can't place the blame. Let's put the blame on Maine boys. Let's put the blame on Maine. No, you can't put the blame on anyone else. And if you start to do that, there's not going to be healing, but you're going to find yourself separating yourself from your wife and from your children and stopping any means of healing. So you have to realize you have sown seeds of doubt in your mate's mind about you, about your character, about your trustworthiness, and you have sown seeds of doubt in all probability in their own hearts about themselves, unless they are very secure in their hearts, unless they have lived in a way that they know is right and honorable before God. And in my book, A Marriage Without Regrets, I titled it A Marriage Without Regrets, not saying that your marriage is going to be perfect, that your marriage is going to be everything you wanted it to be. But no matter where you've been and no matter where you are, you can have a marriage without regrets if you know that you did it God's way. If you know that you were the best wife, the best husband that you could be, if you followed his principles and precepts, and when you did fall, then you corrected it, and you honored what God had to say about marriage and the family and children and finances and sex and love and communication and all those things, then no matter what your mate does, or no matter what happens to that marriage, you can have a marriage without regrets. So if my husband had an affair, I can tell you honestly, that I wouldn't be saying, what did I do wrong? I would just be saying, where did you miss it, Kay? Where did you miss it? Not that I had just been flagrantly wrong, because although I'm not a perfect wife, I try to be what I ought to be. The other day, after teaching on communication, I went to my husband and I said, I've been smitten by the Spirit of God as I've taught on communication. And I want you to know that I am sorry that I haven't always dealt properly with you when I've talked to you. And I just want you to forgive me. And he was so sweet. And he says, well, I haven't done it with you either. And so those kind of things, yes, we're all going to have faults, but you need to know how to live so that you don't stand there and condemn yourself and think yourself absolutely worthless. Now, how am I going to show you biblically what happens to your mate when you commit adultery? What your mate goes through, what your mate has to deal with? Well, as I prayed about that, I thought, God gives us examples. And the Old Testament was written for our encouragement and our instruction, upon whom the end of the ages has come. And as I began to think about that, I thought, God has a wife. His wife is Israel. And God's wife committed adultery. God, how did you feel when your wife committed adultery? How did you handle her when she committed adultery? And so I thought, if I could look at God, then I could show you maybe how your mate feels and what your mate is having to deal with. And the first thing I saw was in Ezekiel chapter 6. And I'm going to take you there right after this break. What does adultery do to the mate whose trust you've broken? The one that you have violated the marriage covenant with? Well, Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 9, God is talking to Israel. Now you have to understand, in Jeremiah and in Ezekiel, and we're going to go to Ezekiel 16 where he explains the whole thing. But God says that he's married to Israel. He says that Israel's children are his children, the children that he has brought from the union between him and this nation that he is covenanted to in marriage. And in Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 9, he says, then those of you who escape will remember me among the nations to which they have been carried captive. Now, what he's saying in essence is this: you have been idolatrous. You have gone after other idols. You have played the adulterer because you've worshiped sticks and stones, and you've made love to your enemies under their idolatrous trees. And those idolatrous trees were, in those days, what they would do is they would take trees. You've been to Disney World, and they shape trees in the forms of animals and things like this, and they're darling. Well, in the olden days, in biblical days, the heathen nations would shape trees in phallic symbols, in sexual symbols. And that's where they would worship their gods. And so he says, okay, you've played the harlot with me. You've gone after these other gods. Now, because of that, I'm going to have to judge you. And I'm going to scatter you. I'm going to kill some of you by sword and famine and pestilence, and others of you I'm going to scatter among the nations. Now, the ones that survive and the ones that don't die are those that are righteous, those that have grieved over what's going on. So he's talking about those that are going to be carried captive into the other nations. And he says, and those of you who escape this judgment, will remember me among the nations to whom they have been carried, how I have been hurt. I have been hurt by their adulterous hearts which turned away from me, and by their eyes which played the harlot after other idols, and they will loathe themselves in their own sight for the evils which they have committed, for all their abominations. He says, you're all of a sudden going to understand, you have really hurt me. You have hurt me so deeply. You have hurt me so much more than you can begin to understand. And that's the way your mate is going to feel. You have hurt me. You have hurt me. And you know what? You're sitting across the table, or you're sitting in the bedroom, you're laying in bed and you're propped up on your elbow, and you see your mate and you see the tears in their eyes, and you hear the stammering of their lips, and you see them saying, I just can't let you touch me. Not right now. You don't know how I'm hurt. Or the man is saying, I am sorry. I'm sorry. But right now, there is no desire in my heart for you, because all I can think about is the way you betrayed me and what you did. And you listen, and you loathe yourself and your heart because of what you have done. Now's not the time to stop. Now's not the time to give in. Now's not the time to move to separate bedrooms. Now's not the time to move to separate houses. Now's not the time to divide the furniture and the money and the stocks or whatever, and the house and the kids. Now's not the time. God wants it mended. I think about Robert Crane, and I think what would have happened if he had come home after his adulterous affair, if he had come to his senses and seen what it was doing to his wife and to his children. Maybe he wouldn't have become an alcoholic. Maybe he wouldn't have died, just a lonely, terrible person inside, feeling terrible inside. I watched it on Biography, and it grieved my heart. God watches. And he sees these situations, and he sees these bedrooms, and it grieves his heart because he understands. And you need to understand, you have hurt, you have wounded the heart of your mate. Now, in Ezekiel chapter 16, God talks to them. In this chapter, he reminds them of when he saw them at Israel. You had been born. You were cast out in a field. Your cord was uncut. You were unwashed, and I saw you squirming in your blood. I use all of this as the first page in my novel, Israel, My Beloved. Of all the books I've written, and I've written 70-some books, 40 books and 70-some, including all the study guides. But this is one that is so near and so dear to my heart because it's the whole history of Israel. And it's the history of Israel shown to you in the person of Sarah. Sarah, who is the wife of God, and what happens when she commits adultery. But I opened the book with this passage of how he saw her squirming in her blood. Her cord was uncut. She was unwashed. And then how he took her and how he raised her and how she grew to womanhood. And it was the time for love. And he says, and I came and I spread my skirt over you, and you became mine. You became mine. And he talks so adoringly to her of how precious she was to him. And you've got to remember this. In this marriage relationship, there was something that was precious. It may have been years ago, but there were precious moments along the way. There was a precious moment when you met each other. There was a precious moment when you decided that you were going to get married. There was a precious moment maybe when your child was born. There was a precious moment maybe when you were struggling financially and wondering how you were going to make it, and how you scrimped and saved and went without, and you remember it. There was that precious moment before he went to school, and you started supporting him, and there were precious moments. And then something happened and the adultery came. God reminds her of this. He says, I swore to you and entered into a covenant with you so that you became mine, declares the Lord God. Then I bathed you with water. I washed off your blood from you, and I anointed you with oil. I clothed you with embroidered cloth, and I put sandals of porpoise skin on your feet. Can't you just see her walking in? I've done it to my husband. See my new shoes? And I'm turning this way and I'm turning that way. And he's looking at me, and I'm waiting for him to say, you've got good looking legs, Kay. He says, I put sandals of porpoise skin on your feet. I wrapped you in fine linen, and I covered you with silk. I adorned you with ornaments, put bracelets on your hands and a necklace around your neck. I put a ring in your nostril, earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head. Thus you were adorned with gold and silver, and your dress was fine linen, silk, and embroidered cloth. You ate flour and honey and oil, and you were exceedingly beautiful, and you advanced to royalty. Then your fame went forth among the nations on account of your beauty, for it was perfect because of my splendor, which I bestowed upon you. I'm your lover. I'm your husband. I've provided for you. You're beautiful because I've helped you be beautiful. And that's what a husband is to do in Ephesians chapter 5. He is to take his wife, and he is to help her to grow and to mature and to be without spot and be without blemish. He is to nourish her and cherish her, tuck her under his arm and protect her. And there are those times, and when we're loved, we blossom and we become, more than we ever thought we could be. And we have that security of knowing I belong. There's one that understands me. There's one that provides for me. There's one that will never leave me. There's one that is close. There's one that loves me unconditionally. If I become old, if I become sick, whatever, I've got a mate that is going to continue to love me. If the world hates me and the world rejects me, if my boss says he doesn't like my work and he's going to let me go, when I come home, there's one that says, you are so talented, and you're not going to have trouble getting a job, and don't you worry about it, we're going to make it. There's that security and that bond. And then all of a sudden, adultery breaks it all. When did Israel get in trouble? Israel got in trouble when she was at ease. Israel got in trouble when her fame spread abroad. If you listen to biography, if you watch the stories of Frank Sinatra, and you watch other men and Hogan's Heroes and others, you'll find out that there was once a romance, there was once fidelity, and then fame came, and then because they were so busy and because the career was more important, or because there was jealousy over who was getting more attention, then there came the affair. And this is what happened. He says, you trusted in your beauty, and you played the harlot because of your fame. You poured out your harlotries on every passerby who might be willing. Now watch what he says. You took some of your clothes and made for yourself high places of various colors, and you played the harlot on them. You also took your beautiful jewels made of my gold and my silver, which I have given you, and you made for yourself male images, that you might play the harlot with them. You took your embroidered cloth and covered them, and offered my oil and my incense before them, and also my bread, which I gave you. You would offer before them for a soothing aroma. What is he saying? He's saying the thing that you need to understand that your mate feels. You took our money and took her to a hotel, and you've never taken me to a hotel. You took her on a business meeting, and you never took me on a business meeting. Or I gave you that car, and you've been meeting him in that car? This is our house. You mean you had him over here? You mean you let him sleep in my bed? In other words, listen, in marriage, two become one. And what is his is yours, and what is yours is his. And then in adultery, when you commit adultery, you take something to some degree that belongs to the other person, that belongs to your oneness, to your intimacy, and you share it with a harlot. You share it with another man, another woman. Just get the grief of all of this. Think about it. Until next week.